And welcome to episode 15 of the MMA Rundown. Nate Diaz is back in the UFC, and he is back with a win. He is the West Coast gangster, as he would say, and he looks like he wants to be fighting Jorge Masvidal, which is just a fantastic fight that I'll get to later. But before I get into my actual before I actually start off, just to talk about what we'll be going over today, we've got Stipe Miocic getting his title back over Daniel Cormier. We've got Nate Diaz defeating Anthony Pettis. Yoel Romero and Paulo Costa had just an absolute war, fight of the night easily, fight of the year possibly. Talk about what to take out of that fight. UFC 241 as a whole, obviously there was a whole card there, not just the 3 fights. I'll talk about the entire card as well. Henry Cejudo and Valentina Shevchenko have had a little tongue-in-cheek beef. I'll talk about what's going on there and how a lot of different people are taking it and how I feel about those takes in and of themselves. Conor McGregor had punched an old guy at a pub back in April. But all that was a rumor. Now we have video. Now we know what happened. Talk about that. Nate Diaz, before UFC 241, he had gone to his open workout and decided that rather than actually working out, he would just smoke a joint. I'll talk about why that was such a valuable decision on his part and why that could have contributed big time in terms of the UFC 241's pay-per-view buys and just ratings in general. Looking at some stories from the world of wrestling, particularly with Team USA. Kyle, Dake, and Alex Dieringer finally had their chance to compete for their spot on the world team. We'll talk about who won that. And then also Yianni and Zain had been in limbo for a while. There's finally at least some clarity there, so I'll talk about what happened there as well. Before we get to that, there are a couple of different jiu-jitsu events that had happened over the weekend. So we had Kasai on Flow Grappling, and then we also had Kinektic on UFC Fight Pass, so I'll just go through the results from there. With Gabi Garcia, as I was just mentioning before, she received a lot of criticism prior to her match at Fight to Win, and the CEO of Fight to Win, Seth Daniels, came out and was very upset about that. So I'll talk about his comments and say whether or not the fans that were giving her trouble were in the right to do so. We've got Bellator 225 coming up. There's no UFC coming up this coming week, so Bellator is going to be the big card. I'll preview that card. And then for some final notes, in Ryzen, Kyoji Horiguchi, who was very good in the UFC, got all the way up to a title fight against Demetrius Johnson before losing that fight. But from what we've heard, he's improved a lot since then. Ended up winning the Ryzen title. Ended up going over to Bellator and winning their title by beating Darian Caldwell not once but twice. He just fought in Ryzen and lost, so I'll talk about that as well. But to go back to the top, we'll start with Stipe Miocic getting his title back against Daniel Cormier. And boy, this was a wild fight to me. From what I've seen from Stipe is a guy who he is getting older. And it's not that it's hard to say that he has a bad chin because at heavyweight a lot of these guys hit really hard, so you take some hard shots and you're gonna go down even if you have a great chin. But he has shown to be a little bit chinny in the past, and Cormier was hitting with some seriously hard shots early in that fight. I was shocked at the way that both Cormier was taking Stipe shots, but also at the way that Stipe was taking Cormier shots. Cormier was doing very well on the feet, ended up getting a huge takedown in the first round. Got him down, clearly won that round. Second round was a little bit closer. Third round was kind of close, I guess you could say. And at that point, the judges' scorecards were 29-28, 29-28, and 30-27 for Cormier. So that would mean that even though Cormier was getting just destroyed in that fourth round, even if he just loses that 110-9, then on one judge's scorecard, he's up 3-1, and the other one it's 2-2. So it looked as though in the fourth round, Cormier was just trying to get his gas back and save it for the fifth. So there's a chance, at least if he survives, that he's likely to win that fight, but Stipe just poured it on him, and Cormier just didn't have an answer for him. And what was surprising to me about that is the answer for Stipe's left hook to the body was the punch that Cormier was landing over and over, and a fairly similar punch to the one that knocked Stipe out in the first fight, and that would be the overhand right. Because one of the things that happens when you throw that lead hook to the body is you obviously, because your hand's down, because you're throwing the punch, you don't have your defense there, but you're also putting your weight forward. And you're going to be in punching range. If you can land a lead hook, the other guy can definitely land an overhand. But Cormier was so busy just trying to save his energy, it seemed like he was more concerned about defending the punch than trying to counter it. And as a result, Stipe was able to just keep throwing that left hook over and over and over without fear of getting countered. And I feel like had he done that in the first round, he would have gotten himself in a lot of trouble. But doing it in the fourth round when Cormier was actually trying to conserve his energy and just trying to recharge his batteries effectively, it was great timing for it, and that's why it was so effective. And the amount of shots that Cormier was able to take, being exhausted and taking those body shots, I mean, he's going to get some crap, obviously, because he did get finished, but he took a lot of really hard shots before Stipe finally got to him. But Stipe was able to get to him, knocks him down, and finishes it up against the cage. And with that, Stipe Miocic is now a heavyweight champion again, and the heavyweight division is in a very odd spot. And it's kind of hard to say where you're going to go from here. The assumption would have been that if DC wins, then either DC retires, and then you have just a brand new clean title fight with Francis Ngannou and someone else, or DC moves down to 205, at which point you could make it an interim title fight that I think everyone kind of knows is really the actual title fight, and have Francis Ngannou in there as well. But with Stipe winning, now it's a little bit more complicated because, for one, Stipe, when he weighed in for this fight, he was 230 pounds. Now, in the post-fight interview, when he was being asked why he was 230 pounds, he was saying he wasn't actually trying to be any smaller. It's just that he was working out hard. It was summertime, so it was more of like a time of year thing, and just the fact he was working hard. It's not like he was actually trying to lower his weight. But by being 230 pounds, that means he's 25 pounds away from light heavyweight, and he didn't cut any weight. So you'd figure, had he actually been trying to lose some weight, plus been going through a weight cut, Stipe Miocic reasonably could make 205 pounds, and that fight with Jon Jones becomes very interesting. So as far as likelihood goes, I don't think that Stipe is dropping to 205 to fight Jon Jones next, but it's not like that's out of the picture. If DC decides he does want to come back, you probably do have to run it back, especially since DC ran it back with Stipe. So then at that point, Francis is just kind of stuck in limbo and sort of SOL at that point. You also have to wonder how quick these guys are going to be able to return. As I was mentioning before, both were taking some seriously hard shots. If they do decide to come back and come back quickly, whoever ends up facing them is going to be very lucky. If Jon Jones, well, I guess Jon Jones had a rough fight his last fight too, though. Although it's not as though he took as many shots to the head. I think his legs were more messed up than his head. But you'd have to wonder with these heavyweights. I don't think they're going to be back within the next 6 months. I think it would make a lot of sense for both of them to get a little bit of rest. But it seems as though Francis Ngannou might get screwed out of here. If I'm telling you what I think is likely to happen, I think it's likely that DC is probably going to take the trilogy fight and just end it there. But if DC does not return, then you could do Stipe and Ngannou too, although that's great for Francis Ngannou if they do that sooner. And then for Jon Jones, you can just give him a guy like Jan Blachowicz, or wait and see how Chris Weidman and Dominic Reyes do, and then try to push the winner into a fight with Jon Jones for the end of the year. That's also another option. But outside of that, I mean, just a great fight. One of the things that sort of bugged me about Daniel Cormier during this fight that I think it's tough, but because I know how Daniel trains. He trains a lot with boxing gloves, so you're kind of used to outreaching your hands and reaching your hands out. But he was doing that a lot in this fight, and with the MMA gloves on, that meant his fingers were out a lot, and he did poke Stipe in the eye a couple times. Herb Dean seemed to think that at least one or two of those times were with closed fists, although it looked like the thumb was out on at least one of them. So that, in a way, that was a little bit frustrating. It was sort of like an old school Jon Jones type of thing where you're hitting all the eye pokes. So as a fan watching this fight, I actually had money on Daniel Cormier, and not just a straight bet, but also a parlay bet where he was the final leg of it. So I kind of wanted to see him win, but after he was landing a few of those eye pokes, I was like, yeah, I mean, for the money, I'd like to still see him win, but you don't want to see someone land a handful of eye pokes and end up winning the fight when the guy just doesn't see a punch coming. So in that way, you're kind of happy for Stipe, because imagine being Stipe Miocic, you lose the first fight after that eye poke. Now, granted, I don't think the eye poke was the reason for the loss. He left an opening that was there before the eye poke and left the same opening after, and ended up getting caught on it. But for him, you have the rematch. It's relatively competitive. You're landing a lot of good shots, and then you take a couple eye pokes, and all of a sudden that changes the way that the fight goes. And now all of a sudden, DC ends up getting the win, and people don't remember you as the great heavyweight champion that you were. They just think of you as the guy who's heavyweight champion because DC wanted to fight at 205 instead of heavyweight the entire time. Because in reality, had DC won this fight and gone up 2-0 on Stipe, that could be a reasonable take to say DC was there the whole time that Stipe was a champion. He just didn't want to fight him, but he could have beaten him had he done so. So at least for Stipe getting this win over DC, it definitely solidifies him. It solidifies his legacy, and it's really big for him. On to the co-main event, and the fight that was effectively the main event for most people, the fight they were most interested in. You had Nate Diaz versus Anthony Pettis. And this fight, this was a tough one for me too. I actually did get my bet right on this. I did bet on Nate Diaz. But one of my issues with it was trying to figure out, with Nate Diaz being out for 3 years, how much had he been training during that time? He was saying all along that he was still training because he loves to train, and he was training like he had been preparing for a fight anyway. I believed him. After watching the fight, I think he was telling the truth. Still had his great cardio, seemed to be his same old self in some ways, maybe even a little bit better. It is worth noting though that a lot of times when he was moving forward on Pettis, he was leaving his head open and took some really big shots. Pettis was actually landing a lot of really good punches, and Diaz just ate him. So at least for Diaz, his chin's still there. But still, great fight from Diaz. Did a very good job on the feet. Good job of pressuring Pettis. Pettis didn't wilt in the same way I expected him to. He did wilt a little bit, but surprisingly stayed in there for the whole 3 rounds and never got finished, even though he was pretty close to being finished in the 3rd round. But Pettis, the ground exchanges with those two were also pretty interesting. You see Pettis in some really bad situations, having Diaz on his back and still find a way to get out. Diaz just constantly attacking, constantly moving forward. Wonderful fight. To me, the value of this fight would be either way. Even if Diaz lost, you could still sell a fight with him and Conor eventually. Although Conor's got his own issues that I'll get to eventually. For Pettis, he was at number 7 in welterweight. Though the win over Chiesa was at 155, Chiesa is now doing fairly well at welterweight. So if he has wins over Chiesa, Wonderboy, and then Diaz, you'd have to think he would be pretty close to a big fight. It's unfortunate that him and Woodley trained together because you'd figure that might be a fight that they could potentially make had Pettis won, because Woodley had to back out of that fight with Robbie Lawler. But obviously that's not on the table anymore. For Nate Diaz, he calls out Jorge Masvidal. Masvidal just had a giant smile on his face, looked like a kid in a candy store. So for him, he was in a position where he either want to take a title fight or a money fight. It looks like Colby has taken the reins on the title fight now. So for him, he's probably not going to get Conor, but getting Nate Diaz is not a bad alternative. And for us fans, I think I'm more interested in watching Jorge fight Nate than I am in watching Jorge fight Conor. So if that fight does come to fruition, I cannot wait to see it. It's going to be fantastic. Next fight on the card, and this one, there was some controversy in it, but before I get to the controversy, I just need to talk about how fantastic of a fight this was. Yoel Romero and Paulo Costa. This was absurd. I felt like I wasn't even watching humans fight here, because some of the shots that were landing, the way that these guys took them, it just didn't make any sense to me. Costa was landing humongous shots, and not just to the head, especially to the body. Some of the body shots he landed were just cringe-inducing, and Yoel Romero would just take him like it was nothing. It was bizarre. He'd kind of make his face, stick his tongue out, just kind of leave his mouth wide open while he's in the middle getting punched in the face. Just insane stuff. They did get dropped occasionally. There were a couple of drops in this fight, but the shots that were thrown, the shots that were taken, like, it was just absurd to me. And you have to think, like, for Israel Adesanya or Robert Whittaker, whoever wins that fight, man, like, Costa's gonna be tough. Costa's one of those guys, and I think this is sort of like a UFC thing that happens a lot, is that the UFC likes to bring in guys who have undefeated records, who have very strong records, and who just finish guys in most of their wins. And oftentimes when these guys come into the UFC, these guys with great knockout power who are very good finishers, they'll win a couple of fights and start to work their way up, and then they'll hit a wall when they start having to face like the best technical guys. An example, this could be like a Devontae Smith even from the prelims. And with Costa, you look at him, he's just super jacked, and you kind of think, oh, maybe he's another one of those guys. He's one of those guys who hits really hard, but you put him up against the really skilled fighters, that's when he's going to start to have trouble. And this fight with Romero seemed to be that kind of a matchup. A guy in Romero who is an Olympic wrestler, a guy who's going to force him to grapple, you would think. And man, Costa, his wrestling defense was fantastic. When he did get taken down, he was able to find a way back up pretty quickly. And the striking, it is not just that he hits hard. He has a lot of different strikes in his arsenal, but he's extremely good at mixing up levels on it. A lot of guys just like to hunt for the head the entire time. Costa goes to the body a lot. And those shots that he landed to the body on Yoel Romero, and the fact that Romero didn't seem to get all that tired from him or even get hurt by him, it is stunning. Like, it's absolutely stunning that Romero was able to take the shots he did. But you'd have to figure that Whittaker or even Adesanya, if they have to take similar shots, they're going to be in some trouble. So, to me, not just, granted, we'll talk about the decision too, but not only did Costa win this fight, which is big to get a win over Romero, but man, I'm really starting to have a hard time seeing who's going to run through him. He might lose a close fight here or there, but he is the real deal. He's not just a guy who can knock people out. He's not just a guy who's strong but lacks some technical growth. He has what it takes. Like, he could be a middleweight champion by, I don't know that he'll be a champion by the end of this year because I don't think the turnaround's going to work out that way, but in a year from now, it would not shock me if Costa was a middleweight champion. And he's also a guy, if you look at him, who may at some point also feel like jumping up at 205, so he may also be a guy where if John Jones continues to defend his title at 205, he could be an extremely difficult fight for John Jones somewhere down the line as well. Now, as far as the decision goes, I wasn't watching this fight as a judge. I was just watching it for enjoyment, and as you could hear when I was just breaking it down, Costa was landing some seriously heavy shots, and so to me, the things that stuck out in my memory the most were the heavy shots that Costa was landing. It's sort of hard from a judge's standpoint. If a guy lands an incredibly heavy shot and the other guy just no-sells it, how much credit do you give it? I'd still give it a lot of credit. So even though if you look at the stats on this, Costa in the numbers should have lost this fight, and by that what I mean is round number 1, Costa outstruck Romero 37-32. So you can give round 1 to Costa. Round 2, Romero outstruck him 40-37. So if you're just going off of strike numbers, he also had a takedown in that round. If you're just going off of strike numbers, though, you would give Romero the second round, and then Romero outstruck him 53-44 in the third. So if we're just doing strike numbers, then Romero wins rounds 2 and 3. Although I think when I was watching, I was also accounting for forward pressure and also accounting for how heavy the shots were that landed from Paulo Costa, specifically those to the body. But to me, with that being said, I don't see how you could look at this fight and say, oh, Costa didn't deserve that win. Costa definitely did enough to put himself in a position to win there. I thought he won the fight when I watched it. I haven't gone back and rewatched it to determine whether or not that was the right call, but all 3 judges agreed. I think a lot of people really like Yoel Romero, so for him to be in a close fight, you tend to want to see him win, but to me this doesn't really come across as a major robbery in any way. But then on to the rest of the card. This was a card that was full of decisions and some fights that weren't terribly interesting, and then the main card got around, and boy, did things get a lot better. So in the fight before the Costa Romero fight, we had Gabriel Benitez and Sadiq Youssef. This was an excellent fight. Benitez dropped him early. Youssef was able to recover, then dropped Benitez and was able to finish him. Youssef was just throwing extremely hard from the get-go, and fortunately for him, he was able to get the finish. You have to wonder if this fight goes 3 rounds, if he's able to keep that pace the entire time, but he had enough there to get by and get the victory, and really big win for him. I'm not sure where he's going to go next from here. There's a lot of talk on ESPN about a UFC Africa somewhere down the line, but it doesn't look like the UFC is planning anything like that, let alone actually starting to talk to different locations out in Africa and trying to book a location and set up an event. So Yusuf's next fight is very unlikely to be in Africa, so I think for them, you probably just want to give him another guy who's an up-and-comer at the weight class and see where he goes from there. And then the first fight on the card was Derek Brunson versus Ian Heinisch. A lot of people expected Heinisch to get the win here. Heinisch was coming off of a win over shoe-faced Antonio Carlos Jr., and it looked as though he was going to win this fight within 30 seconds. Landed a huge head kick early on, but Brunson just kind of hung onto the leg and wrestled his way back to recovering, so just kind of hung on to him. Definitely lost that first round, though, but then came back in the second and third, was able to beat Heinisch with his volume, and with that being said, was able to end up getting the victory here. Only got 2 takedowns over the course of the fight, even though he attempted 10 of them, but his experience and I guess his pacing, I think was a really big part here, was enough to get Derek Brunson the win. On to the prelims. The main event on the prelims was Devontae Smith versus Kama Worthy. This fight was great for me because it made up for Daniel Cormier losing. Ended up getting me in the green for the night on my betting. One of the weird things I noticed is that, and I think first off I should mention the odds. The odds were minus 1,000, so 10-1 favorite for Devontae Smith. Kama Worthy came back at like a plus 650 underdog, so you bet $1, win $6.50. I bet $5 just to throw a quick little amount of money on him, and won back like $33. But what was weird to me is that when they were doing the previews, they were acknowledging that they trained before, and Devontae Smith made a weird comment where he said, hey, the last time we trained was 2.5 years ago. I'm different now. And to me, when I hear the two guys that trained before and they're going to be fighting and I'm trying to take it from a betting standpoint, I'm listening for like anything I can to indicate how the rounds went before. And with the odds like that, you would have figured that Devontae was just destroying him all the time in the gym, and that they would talk in a way that sort of indicated that. For Devontae to say, oh, it's 2.5 years though, I'm different now, at least that tells me that they were close. But it could also mean that Kama was getting the better of him in the gym. I'm not sure that Kama was getting the better of him in the gym at the time, but for him to say it's 2.5 years and I'm different now, that told me this fight should not be, the odds should not be what they are, so I'm going to throw some money down on Kama. And fight started, both of them were fairly tense, especially Kama. Kama looked incredibly tense, but ends up landing a big lead hook in the exchange. And by big, I mean, I guess it had the effect of a big hook. It didn't look, when you watch the punch, it didn't look like it should have been as effective as it was, but I guess you had Devontae moving forward and sort of running into the punch as he was letting his own. Also got hit behind the ear, but gets dropped. Kama finishes on the ground and gets a huge win. Not just does he get the big win in his UFC debut, but he also gets $50,000 for a performance of the night bonus. Fight before that, we had a huge fight at bantamweight. Probably should have been the main event on ESPN for the prelims, but it's not really that big of a deal otherwise. But Rafael Assunção, who only seems to lose to champions at bantamweight or title challengers, ends up getting beaten by Corey Sandhagen. Score in that fight was 30-27, 30-27, and 29-28. What was surprising to me wasn't that Sandhagen was getting the better of him on the feet. I think that's what a lot of people expected, but was how well Sandhagen did on the ground. A lot of unusual exchanges, a lot of odd positions, but it seemed like Sandhagen was incredibly comfortable there, even though Assunção has a very good black belt. Was able to work his way out of some bad spots, was able to even get into some decent spots on his own, and as a result, ends up getting the win here. So for Corey Sandhagen, he's in a tough spot now because bantamweight is all of a sudden a really deep division. There are a lot of really good guys that are towards the top of the rankings. I'll actually pull up the rankings right now just to go through. Then obviously this is before the adjustments made after Assunção lost. But you have Cejudo as the champion, Moraes at number 1. I don't think Moraes is booked right now. You have Aljamain Sterling number 2, Assunção at 3, who's going to end up falling down. Peter Yan at 4. Yan will probably move up to number 3. Then you have Pedro Munoz, Dominic Cruz, Cody Garbrandt, Jimmy Rivera, and then Corey Sandhagen. So for Sandhagen, who does he get next? It looks... And you also have Frankie Edgar in the mix too, and I think that's going to complicate things as well. There were some rumors that Frankie Edgar and Aljamain Sterling would fight for an interim title, or at least fight for, I guess, a number 1 contendership. If that's true, and I don't know what it is, but since it was reported, we'll just pretend that it was, because it sounds like that's at least something that they're looking at doing. That takes Aljamain off the board. Maybe you give him a fight with Marlon Moraes. I think Sandhagen Moraes is a tremendous fight, so that's one you can do. You could also do Peter Yan versus Corey Sandhagen. That'll be a very interesting fight on the feet. I don't know about Pedro Munoz, and then Dominic Cruz. It's not clear when he's exactly looking to return. Would not put Cody Garbrandt against Corey Sandhagen. That would not be very nice to Cody Garbrandt. And then Jimmy Rivera has been losing a handful of fights lately, so I don't think that fight makes sense either. Except for Sandhagen, I guess, just looking at the rankings, the fight that seems to make the most sense at this point would probably be Peter Yan or Marlon Moraes. Either way, though, you're going to win there. It's pretty tough to say you're not ready for a title shot, but a bit of a tough spot they're in now because not only is Henry Cejudo injured, but he's also a champion at flyweight as well. And Joseph Benavidez probably deserves a title shot sometime soon. So we'll see how the deck moves around at 135 if they do use an interim title or how they handle it. But Corey Sandhagen definitely positioned himself very well by getting this win over Rafael Assunção. The fight before that, though, was Christos Giagos versus Drakkar Klose. Pretty good back and forth fight in the second round. I thought Giagos had Drakkar Klose finished. Made a very small technical adjustment, I would say. So he had Drakkar Klose's back. Klose had both hands on the mat, and Giagos committed both arms to the choke. While committing both arms to the choke, Drakkar Klose didn't really fight it. He just tucked his chin. So when that happens and you're the guy on top, you have two options. You can take the option that Giagos did and just say, okay, I really don't care. I'm just going to try to choke you through your chin. Or you can take one of your hands, use it to pull up on the top of the head or like around the forehead to like lift up the head and open up the chin, sink your arm underneath, and then connect your hands and go for the choke from there. He decided to go try to choke through the chin. Drakkar just kept his chin down, let Giagos burn his arms out, and after the fight, Giagos admitted that his arms were burnt out from that rear naked choke attempt. Had he tried to pull the head up and then try to sink his arm underneath, he probably gets the choke there because it didn't seem like Drakkar was doing much to defend. So in that way, it's got to be pretty tough for Giagos to know that just a small adjustment like that could have been the difference between him getting a finish here in the second round and him losing in a decision. But either way, he was still doing well at that point in the fight, and Klose did a great job of finding his way back to his feet, getting his own takedowns, landing his own big shots, and he was able to steal this fight late and get a win by unanimous decision, 29-28 on all three judges' scorecards. And then the first fight on the card, and I mean, this was just a really odd fight to me, was Manny Bermudez versus Casey Kenny. Now, this fight was supposed to be at 135 pounds. Kenny is a guy who can make flyweight and has in the past. Bermudez, pretty big bantamweight. The Athletic Commission did not let him go down to 135. They said he was at 164 the night of the fight. So they moved this fight up to 140 pounds. Bermudez is known for his grappling, known for being an excellent submission hunter, and there were a lot of exchanges on the ground. Bermudez, I just did not understand what I was seeing out of him. He made a ton of mistakes on the ground. And the thing about him is that I'm not saying that as if like I know something that he doesn't, or I was seeing technical openings that he didn't see. I'm sure he saw all those openings. He just didn't go for them. And I think whenever he does actually go back and watch the fight film on this, he's gonna just be kicking himself because there were just a ton of missed opportunities. A lot of times where he would commit to submissions where it was very unlikely that he would finish, and he would give up in position in the process. A lot of times where he had opportunities to pass to a better position and would just opt to throw a couple of arm punches or just not even go. There was one time like late in the third round where he could have ended up in mount had he just like curled his heel back to his butt and just sort of like let his leg hang out there so he could end up in top of half guard instead. Just like a lot of really odd decisions technically that kept Casey Kennedy in this fight. Fight ends up going to decision 29-28 on all three judges' scorecards. But you feel like Bermudez had plenty of opportunities to, at the very least, dominate rounds, but more likely than not, be able to get a finish, and he just didn't do it. I don't know what was going on there. Maybe this was a really bad camp. That could have been why he was in such a bad spot with his weight in the first place. But with that being said, Bermudez is likely now to be moved to 145 pounds after what just happened here with the weight. This just wasn't a very good showing from him, and it's frustrating because he's a lot better than what we saw from him. So hopefully for him, next time he does fight, we're going to see a better Manny Bermudez. We'll see a Manny Bermudez that's more like the one that we've seen in the past, and just this will be a bit of an aberration. But this was just a really odd fight for him. Really frustrating fight as a jiu-jitsu guy to watch it because you just see all these openings that he wouldn't take, and just like why? Like I know you know what to do here, but you're not doing it. Like what's going on? As for the early prelims, we had Hannah Cyphers defeating Jody Escobar. Escobar is now 6-6, but is still on the UFC roster. Kind of odd there, but I guess that's neither here nor there. Kyung Ho Kang versus Brandon Davis. Pretty solid fight here. One of the big things that stuck out to a lot of people was the ref standing them up in the third round after Kang was in side control. Heard a couple arguments on this. The first argument is this is an absolutely ridiculous stand-up. What the hell is he doing? The second one is, well, Kang really wasn't doing anything from top. I would definitely say it was more on the ridiculous side than it was that he's not doing anything from top. There definitely were periods of time where Kang was just squeezing or just like getting a gable grip, holding on tight and just trying to maintain the position. But at the time that it was stood up, that was not the case at all. He was looking to fight the in this case it would have been Davis's left arm, but Davis was using his left arm to frame against the head and use that as a route to escape, and Kang was doing a good job of fighting that and trying to take that away before he advanced. He was working to isolate the arm and then try to use that to then be able to pass him out, and that was actually the process he was in when the fight got stood up. So bad stand up there, and then a really odd call by the ref later on where Davis was in bottom of guard, and the ref said, "Hey, bottom, now it's your job to make sure that there's activity from here." And that's not a smart thing to say because you can stall from top of guard. Like for him to say that it was up to Davis to get out of that position as if King couldn't stall from guard if he wanted to, it's almost like he doesn't understand that stalling can be done from top and from bottom. So really odd officiating there. I think whoever that ref was needs to brush up on some jiu-jitsu and train a little bit more and understand that there's a lot that goes into the side control position from top if you're going to try to pass him out. And that you can also stall from top. So hopefully, if he does train jiu-jitsu again and he decides to play some guard, someone just digs their head in his chest and hugs his hip, and maybe he'll realize that stalling from top is something that can happen and something that happens rather often in MMA. And the first fight in the card was Sabina Mazo getting a win over 3-3 Shayna Dobson. So that covers it for UFC 241. And I guess that brings me to some other stories that have been happening around the world of MMA over the week. The one that seemed to get the most traction prior to Nate Diaz smoking some CBD at open workouts was Henry Cejudo calling out Valentina Shevchenko. I'll play the clip. I think it's pretty obvious when you listen to the clip that this wasn't a serious call out, but some people took it that way anyway because, of course, they did. But here's the clip.
Intergender world champ. So I'm out here enjoying my beautiful Sunday here in beautiful Las Vegas. But my phone just keeps blowing up. That somebody by the name of Valentina the Bullet Shevchenko is the most dominant champion in the world. And guess what? I get a little jelly. Because you know what? She has gold and I want that gold. Valentina Shevchenko, I have a message for you. I'm looking to become the first intergender world champion that this world has ever seen. I'm calling you out. You could be the next to bend the knee to Triple C. So
Yeah, so that was the clip right there. If you watch it, you can definitely tell that he's saying it tongue in cheek. But even if you're just listening to it, I think it's still pretty clear that it's tongue in cheek. He's not actually trying to fight Valentina Shevchenko. But with that story, you had people who took it literally and who thought, "Oh my gosh, he actually does want to fight Valentina Shevchenko. Wow, look at you! You want to fight some women? Aren't you the toughest?" If you took it literally, you're saying a lot more about yourself than you are saying about Henry Cejudo. So that's the first part. Yes, obviously this was a joke. Henry Cejudo has no plans of fighting Valentina Shevchenko. Closest they'll probably get to fighting is if they end up meeting up at some point and deciding to date and they want to recreationally wrestle, if you know what I'm saying. But the other question that came up out of this is like, okay, fine, I know this isn't going to happen, but what would actually happen if Henry Cejudo fought against Valentina Shevchenko? What would actually happen if he fought against Amanda Nunes? And some of the takes that I've heard on that were just absolutely ridiculous. I think there are some people out there who think Shevchenko or Nunes would be able to beat Henry Cejudo. Definitely not the case. Cejudo, from an athletic standpoint, is significantly better than both of those girls. From a technical standpoint, there are areas where you can maybe argue that they have the advantage, but if it were to play out in a fight, I just don't see how either of them could win. We'll start with Valentina Shevchenko. If you're looking at the boxing, I think Henry Cejudo actually would have the boxing edge over Valentina Shevchenko. Shevchenko's an excellent kickboxer, but if you're looking just purely at hands, Cejudo's hands are quicker. He hits a lot harder, but technically he's also very good. He's been very underrated for a while with his boxing, and I think people are starting to finally recognize how good it is with that win over Moraes. I think when people look back at the second fight with DJ, they kind of realize that as well. But I think if you're looking at the hands, he's got the edge over Valentina Shevchenko from a technical standpoint. Never mind the fact that he hits a lot harder and throws a lot faster. With the kicks, Shevchenko's got better kicks, but how important would it be in a fight? And would Shevchenko want to throw any kicks at a Olympic gold medal wrestler? Probably not. And though Shevchenko does have that knockout over Jessica Eye, and people think of her kicking hard because of that, she doesn't have a whole lot of knockouts on her record. So even though she does kick hard, it's not like she's knocking a bunch of girls out, let alone someone like Henry Cejudo. Wrestling, there's really no argument there. Obviously, the Olympic gold medalist has the edge in wrestling. And then jiu-jitsu, it's sort of tough to tell. I think both of them are probably around a purple belt equivalent right now. You'd figure that if it was just a jiu-jitsu match, like if they were just meeting at like ADCC or like Nogi Pans, which is coming up right now, at worst for Cejudo, he just takes her down and just kind of stalls and wins 2-0. So you'd have to figure that at least on the ground, Cejudo's also got the edge there. So he's better. It's much better about taking it to the ground, but then he'd also be fine if it actually goes to the ground. So if we're just looking at a technical breakdown, Cejudo wins in 3 out of the 4 areas that I outlined there. Never mind the fact that he's the better athlete as well. So he'd be fine against someone like Valentina Shevchenko. As for Amanda Nunes, I mean, she punches hard, has good judo. Her jiu-jitsu, I mean, she is a black belt. It's kind of hard to tell where her strengths and weaknesses fall in that. I think she's probably more of a top player than a bottom player. I don't know if she has like the most offensive guard, but again, I think even though Amanda Nunes has pretty good boxing and very effective boxing, I'd still give the edge to Cejudo there, and I don't see how Cejudo would have a whole lot of trouble taking her down at will and staying out of submission. So even there, you'd have to say that Henry Cejudo wins that fight, wins it fairly easily as well. And those are the champions in the women's divisions. As far as anyone thinking that these women could do really well in the men's divisions, I don't see any way that Nunes cracks the top 15 in bantamweight. We just talked about Corey Sandhagen going from number 9 up a little bit. Corey Sandhagen, to me, is significantly better than Amanda Nunes. But if we're looking back just at 125, Shevchenko, there's a weird comment that Faraz Zahabi made in a podcast, and I think he was just trying to be nice, but he was also being fairly vague, and he was saying there's no way that Shevchenko beats Henry Cejudo, but if she fought in the men's division, she would do well. The phrase, but if she fought in the men's division, she would do well, can mean a lot of things. It can mean if she fought against men and started 0-0 as a pro and just tried to work her way up, that she could win a handful of fights, maybe even get to the UFC level. It could mean that if she was in the UFC, she could have a good record against UFC level men. If he was saying that she could have a good record against UFC level men, that's an absurd thing to say. If his point was that she could fight against some other flyweight men out there and beat them, I mean, yeah, I've seen regional MMA. There are some guys that she could probably beat. But I think that says more about the lack of depth at flyweight than it does about how like women power or anything like that. But to me, just the idea of like a woman going over to a men's division and actually being successful, it's tough from an athletic standpoint. And this is a sport. You can be a better athlete, but if you aren't able to get out of the way of a punch, you're not able to get out of the way of a punch. If you're not able to land a punch on someone, you're not able to land it. Like you're not gonna be that effective. So obviously, technique can overcome strength. We've seen people move up in weight in the men's divisions and still end up winning titles. So it's not as though a woman couldn't be effective, but we're sort of at a point in the sport where the women just aren't near the technical level of the top level men. Never mind the fact they're also at these athletic disadvantages too, so it just puts them in a tough spot. But I'd say that'd be about it for the Henry Cejudo thing. Now, a different story that is not terribly positive is Conor McGregor. McGregor, there was a story that had come out in April where he had punched someone at a bar, and when you hear stuff like that, it's like, yeah, I mean, it's a bar, people are drunk there, they might just make up stuff, so you never know. But now that we have the video, we know for a fact what happened, and what happened was just ridiculous. Now, granted, there's no audio on it, so we don't know what was said, but what we see there is Conor McGregor giving out a bunch of shots of proper 12 whiskey to people at a bar. So first off, he starts off by distributing glasses to everyone so he can actually pour the whiskey into it. And he gives his glass to this one old guy, and this old guy takes the glass and just puts it on top of the bar, like, no, I don't want this. So then Conor's like, wait, what the hell's going on here? Gives him another glass. The guy takes the second glass that Conor gives him, puts that on top of the bar as well. He clearly doesn't want a drink. So there's some sort of words exchange. It's hard to say what's going on. But the guy definitely didn't want the proper 12 whiskey. So then after that, they kind of get into this weird chant thing. Conor was just having a fun little chant before everyone took their shots. But it seems like him and the guy who didn't want the whiskey were still talking. And then while the guy's at the bar, sort of facing ahead, facing towards where the bartender would be, and Conor sort of behind and to the side of him, Conor throws from an orthodox stance, throws a lead left hook, and hits him right on the chin. I think everyone's surprised the guy took the punch like it was nothing. Taking a left hook from Conor McGregor it's definitely not nothing, but he ate it like it was nothing. So I'm definitely interested in knowing more about this guy and if this guy was a boxer, what his deal was. Not that being a boxer automatically gives you a better chin. Maybe he rolled the punch or something, or maybe I just don't know how he was able to eat the punch like that, because it was definitely a sucker punch. And not just that. And as I talked about in the video that I did on it, it's not just that Conor threw a punch at him. There are varying levels of punches. Obviously, if you're a boxer, you learn a lot of different aspects that can make your punches stronger. So that can mean shoulder rotation, how your feet are planted, how your hips rotate. If you're just throwing a punch, just throw a punch. You can just kind of slap your arm out there, sort of just like you're throwing an arm punch. This wasn't just an arm punch. He had good shoulder rotation on it. He had good hip rotation on it too. So he meant to do some damage with that punch, and the guy ate it. So I think Conor's lucky that the guy ate it the way he did, because if the guy goes out, then Conor is in major trouble. I think he's still going to be in a little bit of trouble for this. You figure at the very least he's going to get sued, but it could have been a lot worse for him, and it's just there's no need for it. I don't understand what he's trying to gain by punching this guy because he didn't drink his whiskey. There's nothing to gain from it. I think a lot of people are assuming he was on some other drug, possibly coke, when he did it. With Conor, you definitely can't put that past him, but to me, it shows that this money and this fame has definitely gotten to Conor, and you'd have to wonder what kind of training he's been doing. You'd have to wonder how much he even cares about accomplishing more in the sport. Yeah, it probably sucks for him to go from being a two-division champion to now not having any belts at all. To have a guy who he's beaten in Max Holloway winning the 145-pound title and holding on to that. To have a guy who he's beaten in Dustin Poirier fighting for the 155-pound title. And a guy who he doesn't like in Khabib Nurmagomedov holding the 155-pound title. Those things might bother him, but do they bother him to the point where he's actually training hard? Training as hard as all these other guys, training as hard as Poirier, training as hard as Khabib, training as hard as Max Holloway, and focusing on improving like them? That doesn't appear to be the case. So if in his last fight he lost to Khabib, and Khabib's been training hard ever since then, and Conor really hasn't, and Conor's been busy doing stupid shit like this, I don't see how Conor's going to come back and win a rematch. I'm getting to the point where I don't even know that I see him beating a guy like Dustin Poirier, who he's already gotten a win over, let alone Max Holloway. So for me, it's not just that this indicates just really poor judgment on Conor McGregor's part, but it also really makes me wonder if Conor's ever going to get a title again. And that's sort of crazy to say, not just because a couple MMA fights ago he had 2 titles, but also because he's a guy who's such a big star that all it takes is one win for him, and an insignificant one at that. He could get a fight against a guy who was ranked number 10 or number 11, beat him, and he'd be in line for a title shot just because of how well he sells. So if he wants to keep fighting, it's not going to be hard for him to get title fights. I think it's going to be extremely hard for him to actually win one of those things too. So I think there's a good chance that Conor McGregor never has a UFC title again in his career. And it's kind of sad because if he's winning titles, if he's defending titles, if he's staying at the top of the game, he can sell a ton of pay-per-views for the UFC. He can make a lot of money for the company. And in him making a lot of money for the company, yes, that benefits the UFC. Yes, it benefits him, obviously. But it benefits the sport as well. And just having him waste his talents and waste this opportunity, not just for himself, but also for the sport, it's sad to see. I really don't like seeing this. On to the next topic, though, from Conor McGregor, we're going back to Nate Diaz. One of the issues that I've had with the UFC and ESPN is that I think they've done a pretty poor job in promoting their events. Part of it could be that they have an event every week, so it's tough for them to just constantly churn out new content. But to me, the obvious fight that you wanted to sell for this event was going to be Nate Diaz's return after 3 years after fighting Conor McGregor against Anthony Pettis. In a lot of their promos, it would just be UFC 241, Cormier Miocic. And you wouldn't even like have a side note that there's Pettis Diaz, let alone the actual time spent covering the fact that this was Diaz's return. And I mean, early on in this fight week, there wasn't as much talk about this event as you would figure that there would be. Then Nate Diaz goes on stage for his open workout, decides to then instead of actually working out that he's just gonna rip a blunt, and the footage of that goes around, it goes viral, and now all of a sudden people are starting to realize, oh crap, Nate Diaz actually is fighting, oh shit, and a lot of casual fans caught on, and as a result, this card just trended in a really good way. ESPN had to make some adjustments to their programming. Like, oh crap, people are actually really interested in this. We're gonna have to put some more UFC programming on towards the end of the week. So, to me, I don't know that we'll ever like be able to put a number on the value of Nate Diaz smoking that blunt. But I'm telling you, there's absolute significant value to what Nate Diaz did there from a marketing standpoint. The UFC should be very thankful for the fact that it happened. Dana might say, oh, wow, I can't believe that someone's actually smoking a blunt during the open workouts. Privately, he's like, thank God Nate Diaz did that. We fucked up, and Nate Diaz saved our ass there. So really big move by Nate Diaz to do that. Really good for UFC 241 and their sales. So if you're the UFC, maybe you take a little bit of lesson here and say, hey, maybe instead of just promoting the main event, we actually identify the fights that are going to get people interested and go from there. And to sort of build on that, Dana White has been doing this little thing on Twitter and on Facebook where he has the entire fight card on like a board in front of him. And he's like, all right, well, here's the fight that you guys know you want to see, but here are some other fights you got to watch for here. I like that he's doing that. I think the UFC needs to incorporate that more in the promotions. Don't just talk about the fights that are on the top of the card. But a lot of these cards are actually very good cards. It's not just that they have some big name fights on top, but a lot of them have some very interesting prospects on them that are sort of like mixed out throughout the card. So being able to identify those guys beforehand is pretty nice. And I think the UFC should do more of that, and ESPN should also do more of that in their promotion of the events. And then one last thing to mention, though, is that while Diaz did draw some attention midweek, it's worth noting that from a pay-per-view buying cycle, when you're selling a pay-per-view, it's not just that you're trying to get someone to say, okay, I will spend, whether it's going to be $80, whether it's going to be $65, whether you're just paying a portion to go to a bar or to get you're chipping in with a friend. It's not just that you're spending money on the pay-per-view that the ESPN needs to, or that UFC needs to be able to get you to do. They also need you to say, I'm going to spend my Saturday night doing this instead of any other option I have to entertain myself on a Saturday night. And one of the things that's worth noting with that is most people work your normal 9 to 5. They're probably planning out their weekends a little bit before midweek. So you want to be able to get a message to them that's really strong early in the week. So before they already have weekend plans, you make sure that they are going to make the UFC their weekend plans. So yes, Nate Diaz did a good job in saving the card there with or in saving the I don't know if the card was saved in any way, but I'd say in making them more money, he definitely made them more money. So yes, he did a good job there, but by waiting until Wednesday for that to happen, even though they recaptured a lot of their missed opportunity, there probably were still a handful of people who would have watched this card had they known Nate Diaz was on it sooner, but had made other plans beforehand. So for the UFC, you got to get the right message out there, and you got to get the right message out there at the right time. On to the next thing. This is a little bit off topic from MMA, but for USA Wrestling, the World Championships for this year, obviously it's not a non-Olympic year, so the UWW is going to be handling the World Championships. They're going to be in September. The American team has a couple weight classes that still weren't decided. So one of them is Kyle Dake's weight. Kyle Dake is the returning champion at from 2018. He had some injuries, but it looks like he's finally ready to go. So he went against Alex Dieringer. Now, from most people's standpoints, this is a match between the two best wrestlers in the world of that weight class. And the number one wrestler in that weight class is obviously Kyle Dake, given that he was the reigning world champion. He was able to get it done here, wins both matches against Alex Dieringer. But it sort of shows a bigger problem with wrestling in that they decided to do these world teams, so there can only be one person from each country that go to the world championships. And as a result, though Alex Dieringer is likely the number 2 guy in the world, though he has won some other really big international tournaments, he is not going to get a world medal because he is not going to be allowed to compete because Kyle Dake will be competing instead. Really stupid that they do this. If you look at any other individual sport that's out there, they don't do this. They don't, or I guess any other successful one, they don't do this. They don't force one person per country. So a lot of times you have great rivalries at the biggest events in the world. So you could have Serena versus Venus at a Wimbledon final rather than being at a USTA qualifier. You can have Phil versus Tiger at the Masters final rather than it being at a USGA qualifier. But for whatever reason, a lot of people in wrestling are perfectly fine with Kyle Dake and Alex Dieringer fighting it out at just a U.S. World Team qualifier rather than fighting it out in the finals at Worlds when all the eyes around the world are watching. So if you're wrestling and you want to grow as a sport, that's one of the biggest things you can change. One of the biggest things you have to change. You have to understand what you are as a sport, and what you are as a sport is you're an individual sport that can be competed in. I mean at least 40 times a year, but definitely more than that. If you look at some of the NCAA Division I wrestlers, they're competing even more than that. This isn't like boxing where 6 fights in a year is a lot. This isn't like MMA where 6 fights in a year is a lot. This is more like tennis than anything else, where you can really get a lot of matches in there, and it's physically possible to do so. So I would say if you're trying to build a sport and grow it out as big as possible, take a lot of cues from tennis and how they do things and try to build off of it from there. And one thing you definitely don't see in tennis is them limiting people by nationality. I mean, it was only a couple years ago where the U.S. Open women's draw in the semifinals, it was 4 Americans. That wasn't bad for the sport. But for whatever reason, wrestling thinks it's bad for the sport whenever you have multiple people from the same country. Dumb thinking, old-fashioned thinking, not useful thinking. Hopefully they get to a point where they change it. I'm seeing from the community that there's a handful of people who are starting to realize that this is ridiculous. There are definitely some other people who are just used to tradition and want to keep it that way. But I think if you're trying to grow the sport, if you're trying to make it where you're going to get more people watching, and as a result, you're going to be able to bring in more money, and as a result of bringing in more money, the wrestlers are going to be able to get paid more, you have to stop it with this world team bullcrap. Like, it's just not that useful. But then the other weight class that hasn't been decided yet, we have Zain Rutherford and Yianni Giacomo-Hollis. Yianni back at the Beat the Streets event where Jordan Burroughs defeated Ben Askren. Yianni defeated the world number 1 Bajrang. But then going for the world team, he lost his first match to Zain Rutherford, who is a former Hodge Trophy winner with Penn State. In the second match, it looked like he was in a position to win, but there was a really odd rule with the challenge where they didn't follow protocol. And so Zain ended up getting his hand raised, so it looked like Zain Rutherford was going to make the team. They got some lawyers involved, they went to arbitration, and they decided that they're going to just completely wipe out that second match and restart from there. So at some point in the date, hasn't been decided yet, Zain Rutherford and Yianni Giacomo-Hollis are going to wrestle for that final spot on the USA World Team. So Yianni's going to have to win both matches, Zain just has to win one. It's hard to say what's going to happen from there. Now, it is worth noting that after Zain had tentatively won the spot, that Zain and Yianni did compete in an international tournament, and Yianni won that match. So it'll be interesting to see how they go from here. I think they're 2-2 or 2-1 at this point. If you wipe out that second match that got reset, and that way it'd be in favor of Yianni Giacomo-Hollis. But it's going to be tough for Yianni to win 2 straight, or at this point it'd be 3 straight if you count the Yasurdogu match. And if he does, that's great. But at that point, then Zain Rutherford becomes the latest guy who's one of the best in the world who can't wrestle at Worlds. And if Yianni ends up being the one who loses the spot, then, well, Yianni, who has a win over the world number 1 this year, is not going to be able to compete at Worlds because, again, same issue that I just talked about before. As far as jiu-jitsu goes, though, there were a couple big jiu-jitsu events. So the UFC struck a deal with Uriah Faber for this new event called Kinektic, which is just like, I guess, an American-owned version of Quintet. And in that event, there were 4 different teams. Craig Jones was a captain, Chael Sonnen was a captain, Anthony Smith was a captain, and there's a 4th captain. I kind of feel like an idiot for not remembering it. So it was Chris Lytle, Anthony Smith, Chael Sonnen, and Craig Jones. Okay, so that's all 4 right there. But the team that Craig Jones headed, which was called Team BJJ Fanatics, they absolutely dominated. A guy in particular, Lachlan Giles, who is Craig Jones' coach from Australia, ended up submitting an entire team. He submitted Chris Lytle's entire team, so won every single match by submission. Then they get to the finals facing off against Chael Sonnen and submission underground team, and That one didn't go a whole lot different. That one they had to use a couple other guys, but in that match, or I guess in that team match, Craig Jones' team still got the win there. So they only had to use 3 of their 5 guys. So Craig Jones and Edwin Nashmi didn't even have to go, but dominant win there. As for Kasai, this was a pretty good match, or a pretty good card. They had a big bantamweight tournament, it's 135 pounds. One of the interesting things here was what happened in that tournament. So John Jones' jiu-jitsu coach, Rafael Freitas, or Barata as he might be known, he got injured pretty badly and had to pull out. Now, does this have any effect on John Jones? I'm not sure. I don't know how much him and Barata roll in the first place, given that Barata, as I just mentioned, is a bantamweight. You'd figure that with most jiu-jitsu coaches, even when they're injured, they're still around coaching. So I don't know if this is going to have a major impact on John Jones' training camp for whoever he fights next, but still not great to have your coach suffer a pretty severe injury. But just going through the results. So it started off with Richard Alicorn versus Joao Miao. Miao won that match by submission by rear naked choke. Then we had Barata, as I was mentioning, versus Ashley Williams. Williams he's a guy we see on players' cards fairly often on Fight Pass. But he was actually able to get a win over Barata by rear naked choke. Then Barata fought against Joao Miao and got defeated by heel hook, but in that heel hook he got injured and was forced to pull out of the card afterwards. So that's the injury I was referring to before, where it's unclear what that's going to mean for his training situation from now on. Obviously he'll be injured. He'll be healed at some point, but you'd figure he won't be healed by the time that John Jones fights again. So I don't know what sort of impact that'll have on Jones' training camp. But he loses to Joao Miao. Then we have Richard Alicorn versus Ashley Williams. Alicorn won that match by points. Then him versus Freitas, and Freitas did not compete, so Alicorn got the points there. Then Joao Miao versus Ashley Williams was a draw, but Joao was able to win his group and advance to the finals. On the other side, you had Gio Martinez and Edwin Ocasio. Ocasio won that match 4-0. Then you had John Calistine versus Mazakazu Imanari. That is the same Imanari who the Imanari role is named after. That Imanari role is obviously the one that Ryan Hall has become famous for in MMA. But Calistine ended up heel hooking Imanari and getting the win there. Then Gio Martinez faced Imanari, beat him 7-1. And Edwin Ocasio went against John Calistine, and then Ocasio won that match 5-2. Then Imanari against Ocasio. Ocasio won that match as well. John Calistine versus Gio Martinez is a fight that I think may have happened at an EBI before. If it hasn't, it probably will at some point once EBI comes back and they stop doing this combat jiu-jitsu thing. But that match was a draw. So from there, they had a finals match and they had a third place match. The third place match was John Calistine versus Richard Alicorn. Alicorn won that match, and then the finals they had Joao Miao versus Ocasio, and Miao won that match. So Miao wins the Grand Prix at 135 pounds. A couple other matches of note: Tom DeBlas fought against Nick Kagia, who is a much bigger guy, but didn't seem terribly athletic. But DeBlas was able to win that fight by knee bar. You had Morel Santana getting a win over Jonathan Webb. Mateus Diniz versus Josh Hinger, really big match there. Hinger, no-gi world champion multiple times with the IBJJF. But Diniz was not only able to get the win there, but won by rear naked choke. And then the feature bout on the card was Kynan Duarte and Patrick Gaudio, and Kynan got the win there. So that covers the big jiu-jitsu events from this weekend. Speaking of jiu-jitsu, though, there was a story that came out after Fight to Win, I believe it was 121, where Gabi Garcia was in the main event, and she eventually ended up losing that main event. But prior to her fighting in that card, there were a lot of comments online that were like pretty much any other comment section you read regarding Gabi Garcia, just things like, hey, she's a man, she beats up grandmas, all that kind of stuff. And the CEO of Fight to Win, the event that had her on, was not happy at all about it. So I'll read his comments on that. So he says, really disgusted of all the comments from the bitch ass trolls over the past week regarding Gabi Garcia. The shit some of you pussy ass bitches talk about this woman who has accomplished more than any other jiu-jitsu athlete, that is generally the sweetest person, takes time for her fans, and makes me sick. I wish any of you could come to a Fight to Win event and say this shit to her face. Win or lose, Gabi has accomplished more than any of you ever will, bitches. And I did a video about this, and it's sort of like a tough one, because from one standpoint, I definitely understand the fact that he's annoyed that people are talking shit about someone online. That definitely is an issue in MMA. It's not as big of an issue in jiu-jitsu, but it does happen there too. So I get from his standpoint, seeing a bunch of people talk shit, it's annoying. But with that being said, there's shit talk where it's just like, okay, that's an absurd thing to say, and then there's shit talk where there are definitely some grains of truth in it. And with Gabi Garcia, we're talking about someone who actually has tested positive for steroids. We're talking about someone who is the size of an NFL strong safety, who often fights women who are much smaller than her. And so you can understand why there are some reasonable critiques to be made. Now, a lot of times when you're online and you're just looking for a quick little pop, you're not going to say it in the most articulate way. You might just be like, she's the cheater, she's the steroid fraud, um, and other things along those lines. But to me, I guess it depends on the criticism. If your criticism was like, hey, she's a steroid cheat, well, she was. Like, that's a fair thing to say. If you're criticizing her fighting someone who's much smaller than her, that's a little bit tougher just because, like I mentioned, she's 240 pounds. Like, if you're looking for a fair match for Gabi Garcia, that means you're looking for someone who's similar to her physically, which there just aren't a whole lot of people in the world who are. And you're looking for someone who's similar to her from a skill level standpoint, and again, it's not like there's a whole lot of people there. So as long as she has a lot of people that she actually can compete against, that would be considered fair matchups by most. So if she wants to compete, she's going to have to take some matchups against people who are smaller than her, people who are less technical than her. So it's sort of tough to kind of like consider her a bully in that way. I guess if you say, well, she got the size that she has just by cheating, by using steroids, then that's an issue. Okay, fine. There's an argument to be made there, but to me, sort of a tough spot. I'd say, depending on the criticism, Seth Daniels was right, because there were people who definitely went over the line with her, but there were a lot of other people who were making points that weren't untrue at all. So I guess you kind of have to like pick and choose what criticism is fair and what criticism isn't, but it's not as black and white as he tries to make it seem. Next topic from there, though, would be Bellator 225. Not the biggest names on the main card, but there are some interesting names that are mixed in, nevertheless. So the main event is going to be a rematch between Matt Mitrione and Sergey Karatanov. The first time they fought, Karatanov got kicked in the nuts and wasn't able to continue. That was right off the start in the first round, so they just made it a no contest. So hopefully this time we actually get a real answer as to who's better. Then we have Vitaly Minakov, former Bellator heavyweight champion, versus Javi Ayala. That'll be a fairly interesting fight. Ayala is 11-7, so not the best record, but he definitely hits hard and he's a very good fighter. Minakov is 21-1, so much more interesting with him. It'll be interesting to see where he goes from there, and if he does get the win, it'll be interesting to see where he goes in terms of the Bellator heavyweight division. If he's close to a title shot, or if they want to make him fight a handful of other guys before he's ready to fight for a title again. But they also have Timothy Johnson on the card, a UFC vet. Dave Rickles is going to be fighting a guy in Yaroslav Amasov, who's 21-0. Tyrell Fortune will be on the main card. And then in the prelims, we got Nick Newell fighting against Corey Browning. Austin Vanderford, who is Paige Van Zant's husband, as he likes to be known, he'll be fighting. Saba Hamasi, former UFC fighter, will be on the card. Mike Kimball will be on the card. And Ricky Bandejas will be on the card as well, fighting against a guy who's 1-1, which seems like a terrible matchup for that guy. But I guess they're looking for an easy win for Ricky. As far as final notes go, there was a fight overnight in Rizin with Kyoji Horiguchi. Now, Horiguchi is not only the Rizin champion, but he's also the Bellator champion. He defeated Darian Caldwell in Rizin, so then they had a rematch in Bellator for the Bellator title, and Horiguchi won that fight as well. Horiguchi is a guy who fought in the UFC. He got all the way up to a title fight with Mighty Mouse, ended up losing that fight. But there was a lot of talk about how he gotten a lot better since then. A lot of talk about how at ATT he's arguably one of the best fighters there. And so a lot of people assumed, okay, well, the Horiguchi we have now is a different Horiguchi than the one we saw in the UFC. And this Horiguchi may very well be the best guy in the world at his weight. So he goes back to Rizin and fights a guy named Kai Asakura. And not only does he lose that fight, but he ends up losing it pretty much like in the first minute of the first round. So Asakura moves to 13-1. And I mean, where we go from here, to be honest, I don't know a whole ton about the 135-pound division in Rizin, so I'm not sure where they would go from a matchmaking standpoint. I think this is a very bad look for Bellator, because not only do you lose your champion to another organization, but now that guy loses to another guy in his own organization. So it's like, is Asakura the Bellator champion now? Is Horiguchi the Bellator champion now? Like, what are they going to do about the 135-pound title? Like, is it just sort of like this thing that's floating out in space now, and now it belongs to Asakura? Are they going to have to bring Asakura in? Like, it's going to be pretty interesting to see how Bellator handles this, because technically their champion just lost in another organization. And, maybe he hangs on to the title, maybe Horiguchi still is the Bellator champion, but not the best look to have their champion losing to a guy in Ryzen who no one knew of up until this fight. And even though that Horiguchi lost, I still don't know that a whole lot of people are going to know who Asakura is. But that'll cover it for topics for today. Just a couple things to end with. Just want to mention that I do have a channel on YouTube. That channel will have this podcast, but it also has some separate videos that include some of the topics that I just talked about here. Same videos will also be available on BitChute, so that's another option if you don't like using YouTube. As far as the podcast goes, the podcast is on Apple Podcasts, it's on Google Podcasts. You can see all the other apps that it's on by going to the podcast page on Anchor. And I'm also on Twitter as well, so you can follow me there at the _MMA_ rundown. So that'll cover it for this week. Not sure if there's going to be a whole lot to talk about next week. I said the same thing last week with there being no big cards heading up, and here we are having a pretty long episode. But with Bellator being the main event, or the main MMA event going on, it seems like next week might be a shorter podcast, but who knows? A lot of stuff came up this week, and a lot of stuff might come up in the coming week as well.